And Technology will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing entitled Empowering U.S. Veterans Through Technology. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. The impetus for today's hearing goes back a year or so to May 2017 when I first met one of our witnesses, John Wordin, at a Ride to Recovery event for veterans in my district in Manassas, Virginia. I heard firsthand from John about the Hero Track system and the wearable health monitoring device with software designed to help veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. I was fascinated by this technology and the research going on with it and its potential to help our veterans. My district, as so many others, are home to so many research and technology companies on the forefront of technological innovation. So I am particularly pleased, also with a large veterans population, to chair this hearing today to profile technologies to help our dedicated veterans who have served our nation. By shining a spotlight on cutting-edge technologies designed to help combat injured veterans, the Science Committee can help spread the word about the wonderful efforts in which our witnesses are engaged and their impact on the lives of our brave men and women who deserve our care and attention. I also look forward to hearing more about the joint Department of Energy and Department of Veterans Affairs collaboration that will leverage DOE's high-performance computing and machine learning capabilities to analyze health records of more than 20 million veterans maintained by the VA. The goal of this partnership is to arm the VA with data it can use to potentially improve health care offered to veterans by developing new treatments and preventive strategies. This win-win enterprise could revolutionize quality of health care for veterans while simultaneously providing the Department of Energy with unique insight and information to support development of next-generation technologies. We also have representing SoldierStrong, Mr. Meek, who will describe the soldier suit and his efforts to purchase and donate this transformational robotic exoskeleton device comprised of a number of devices. Amazingly, it can help provide paralyzed veterans the ability to once again stand, walk, and hug a loved one eye to eye, a point eloquently emphasized in Ms. MacCallum's testimony. And Ms. MacCallum joins, who is probably more familiar being on the other side, being an interviewer of us, is one of our witnesses today, and we really appreciate her being here and her work for veterans. Now, I mentioned John Wordin, who founded Project Hero 10 years ago to help veterans and first responders affected by injuries, including traumatic brain injury and PTSD, through the programs such as Ride to Recovery. While the success of the program and the therapeutic benefits of cycling, which is one of the main activities that he's engaged in with the Ride to Recovery, obviously, have benefited thousands of veterans. But I also appreciate the opportunity to highlight today how the Hero Track monitoring system can benefit veterans with PTSD, including how it can help generate more data on best practices to improve the lives of veterans. And since we did get together with Mr. Wordin with a Veterans Roundtable in my district yesterday, I can just tell you, and I know this will apply to all of the others testifying today, how excited our veterans services organizations were to hear about these new technologies and how we can partner with them. For example, we have a lot of equine therapy groups that service veterans in my district, and they understood how when we can get more data here, they can now demonstrate how impactful the equine therapy is for our veterans. They know that instinctively, but now we have a way of demonstrating that through data. And I also welcome Dr. Major, who will describe his very important research on motor control related to veterans and service members' prosthetics and orthotics and the underlying factors of falls. An added important benefit of today's hearing is that the technologies, research, and federal programs we will hear about have promising implications for the population at large. I thank all our witnesses for joining us today and for your service and efforts to help improve the lives of our nation's veterans. I now recognize the ranking member of Research and Technology Subcommittee, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock. Thank you for holding today's hearing. I was just looking up Honor Ride on my iPad here, see when the one in Chicago is, so it's good to have you, Mr. Wordin. We're only 6 days away from Memorial Day, and it's the busiest day of the year for me for public events in my district because of the importance my constituents and I place on honoring the men and women who serve in our armed forces. I'm sure my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and the subcommittee present here this morning agree that supporting technologies that improve the lives of these men and women should be a high priority. Unfortunately, many face an uphill battle to overcome the physical and mental toll of war once they return home. That's why this hearing is so important. I want to thank our witnesses for being here to share with us their efforts to provide veterans with the latest technologies to improve the quality of life for our veterans. Almost 20 million U.S. veterans are living today, and just under half are enrolled in the Department of Veterans Affairs healthcare system. The health records generated from decades of care provide a trove of information that may lead to more accurate diagnosis and treatment of certain conditions and diseases. High-performance computing can help analyze this massive amount of data to make it useful for delivering better healthcare outcomes not only for veterans, but also for the general population. The federal government has made strategic investments over the years to advance data analytics and data science research and development. I look forward to hearing from Dr. Kusnezov about the progress of the Big Data Science Initiative being conducted by the VA in the Department of Energy, some of which is taking place in my district at Argonne National Laboratory's Leadership Computing Facility. I'd also like to hear about the privacy and security measures the agencies are taking to protect our veterans' personal information. In addition to the diseases and chronic conditions that the VA-DOE collaboration will address, veterans who survive combat may have to adapt to civilian life with limited mobility due to physical injuries sustained in war. A number of federal efforts support research in related areas, including advanced robotics, prosthetics, and full-body exoskeleton suits. For example, the National Science Foundation funds work examining the interface of brain and machine for mind control of robotic prosthetics. And the National Institute of Standards and Technology has established an international committee to bring together public and private sector stakeholders to define standards for wearable robotics. While the physical wounds of war can be seen, the mental scars are below the surface. Combat and other traumatizing experience may result in long-term damage for veterans. Homelessness and suicide may be manifestations of these mental wounds. 11 to 20% of veterans from the most recent combat operations suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. These figures are similar for Gulf War veterans, and unfortunately, even greater, 30% for Vietnam veterans. I look forward to witnesses' testimony about their efforts to provide physical and mental rehabilitation technologies to our deserving veterans who have already sacrificed so much for our nation. I also look forward to hearing the witnesses' ideas about what more the federal science agencies can be doing to accelerate the development of such technologies. Thank you, Madam Chair. Look forward to hearing the testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize the chair of the committee, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock, for holding such an interesting and important hearing today. Today's hearing will highlight some fascinating technologies and efforts that will empower veterans. The Titan supercomputer at Oak Ridge National Laboratory can process a quadrillion calculations per second. That's a number followed by 15 zeros. Thanks to collaboration between the Department of Energy and the Department of Veterans Affairs, this computer will be used to analyze health records of 24 million veterans to provide improved care. The partnership between the VA and DOE could transform the delivery of health care to our veterans as we use complex computer models to learn more about the causes and warning signs of various diseases. The VA has identified 3 priority areas of focus for early delivery impacts: suicide prevention, prostate cancer, and cardiovascular disease. By providing DOE with access to a large-scale database, the VA will help the Energy Department develop next-generation algorithms and modeling capability while ultimately providing the VA with data it can use to improve veterans' quality of life. One of the witnesses today, Mr. John Wordin, is collaborating with a Texas A&M University professor on a wearable device to help veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And we welcome Dr. Farzan Susan-Gahur, Assistant Professor in the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering at A&M. Thank you and your team in Texas for your hard work and efforts to support our veterans. I would also like to thank Mr. Chris Meek and Ms. Martha MacCallum for their respective efforts on behalf of SoldierStrong. In January, SoldierStrong donated a robotic exoskeleton to the Audie L. Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio, which I represent. This donation will help the facility provide state-of-the-art rehabilitative care to veterans. One of the benefits of hearing from the experts today is that the fruits of their labor are not limited to helping veterans, although they do that so well. They can be applied to people all over the country and the world who suffer from similar ailments and injuries. In addition to this hearing, the Science Committee passed legislation last November to help veterans overcome obstacles as they re-enter the workforce. H.R. 4323, the Supporting Veterans in STEM Careers Act, was introduced by Representative Neil Dunn of Florida, a member of the Science Committee. The bill promotes veterans' involvement in STEM education, computer science, and scientific research and employment. It passed the House in December and awaits action in the Senate. To me, this subject of the hearing shows yet again how technology can meet the world's challenges, and we look forward to our witnesses' testimony today and to finding out more about how that technology can help not just veterans, but as I said, people around the world. Thank you, Madam Chair, and yield back.
And I now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Comstock and Ranking Member Lipinski, for holding this hearing to learn more about the technologies that are being developed to help improve the quality of life of our injured veterans. This is a topic close to my own heart. Before I ran for political office, I served as the chief psychiatric nurse at the VA hospital in Dallas, where I actually helped to start that service. I saw up close the toll that serving in a combat zone can take on our men and women in uniform. I developed a deep appreciation for human frailty and strength alike, and I carried those lessons forward into my political career. I regularly meet with veterans in my district in Dallas to learn about the challenges they face re-entering civilian life and to discuss what the federal government can be doing better to help ease their transition. Today, there are about 20 million veterans in the U.S. Advances in medical response and technology in the battlefield have meant that more veterans are surviving and returning home with traumatic injuries that meant certain death in earlier generations. The protracted conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan resulted in many of our veterans serving multiple deployments in combat zones. Even if they survived these deployments without any visible injuries, some almost certainly suffer in other ways. Veterans experience mental health disorders, substance use disorders, post-traumatic stress, and traumatic brain injury at a disproportionate rate compared to their civilians counterparts. 18 to 22 American veterans commit suicide daily. Younger veterans are at their highest risk. While an exact count is hard to come by, approximately 40,000 veterans today are homeless. These are statistics that should alarm us all. Technology will not solve all of these challenges. However, technology can go a long way to aid veterans suffering from both physical injuries and mental health disorders. Continued advancements in prosthetics and exoskeleton will help improve the quality of life of veterans who have lost limbs. More accurate and wearable predictors of PTSD attacks will help veterans keep themselves and their loved ones safe. and better understanding of the range of conditions that occur in the veterans population will help medical professionals and policymakers alike develop more effective interventions. I look forward to hearing more about the technologies that today's witnesses are working on, and I look forward to a discussion of the role that our science agencies, such as the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, can play in advancing these and other technologies to aid our U.S. veterans. Our veterans deserve nothing less than from our nation and our government than our full dedication to helping them repair the wounds of war that they suffered on our behalf. I thank you and yield back.
Thank you, and I'm now going to introduce our witnesses, but before I do, I did want to recognize Steve Jordan of the Northern Virginia Technology Council, who has worked with the Veterans Employment Initiative, which has been an initiative of our technology companies in Northern Virginia, which has just done wonderful work with our veterans. And I really appreciate having you here today, Steve, to hear about these great technologies and by both public and private investment, which I know NVTC has always been great with public-private partnerships. So thank you. Okay, now our first witness today is Dr. Dimitri Kusnezov, Chief Scientist at the National Nuclear Security Administration at the U.S. Department of Energy. Prior to NNSA, he served as Director of the Office of Research and Development for National Security, Science, and Technology. Dr. Kusnezov earned a Bachelor of Arts in both Physics and Pure Mathematics from the University of California at Berkeley. He also holds a Master's of Science in Physics, as well as a PhD in Theoretical Nuclear Physics, both from Princeton University. Our second witness today is Mr. Christopher Meek, founder and chairman of SoldierStrong. SoldierStrong helps America's servicemen, women, and veterans take their next steps forward by identifying and filling gaps in the traditional systems supporting veterans and members of the military. Originally called Soldier Socks, SoldierStrong stems from Mr. Meek's first project, organizing donations of socks and other supplies from communities and businesses. Mr. Meek holds a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and Political Science from Syracuse University and a Master's of Business Administration and Financial Management from Pace University in New York City. Our third witness today is Ms. Martha MacCallum, Advisory Board Member of SoldierStrong. She's here in that capacity today. Of course, we also know her as a Fox News anchor, where she has highlighted numerous military achievements on her show, The Story with Martha MacCallum. Ms. MacCallum's coverage has included the accomplishments and personal stories of the Green Beret, Navy SEALs, and medal winners for extreme bravery in Afghanistan. She earned her bachelor's degree in political science from St. Lawrence University. She also studied at the Circle in the Square Theater School. Mr. John Wordin, our fourth witness, is president and founder of Project Hero. His work to improve suicide prevention and help veterans and first responders has earned him national recognition. He began his career as a professional cyclist, participating in 3 U.S. Olympic trials and earning a bronze medal in the 1989 U.S. National Championships. Mr. Wordin was also president and founder of the Fitness Challenge Foundation, which was the genesis of Ride to Recovery, founded in 2008. Mr. Wordin holds a Bachelor's of Science in Finance from California State University at Northridge. And I did want to mention, someone just told me that the Vice President tweeted about the hearing this morning. I know when we first met, you had started your Ride to Recovery at the Vice President's house, so I guess he's watching to catch up on this too. So thank you again for joining us today. And then our final witness is Dr. Matthew Major, research health scientist and assistant professor of physical medicine and rehabilitation at Northwestern University. Dr. Major's research focuses on improving mobility and function of veterans with neurological and musculoskeletal pathology through rehabilitation technology and therapeutic intervention. He holds Bachelor of Science and Master's of Science degrees in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, as well as a PhD in Biomedical Engineering from the University of Salford, Manchester in the United Kingdom. So I now recognize Dr. Kusnezov for his 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Johnson, Chairwoman Comstock, Chairman Weber, Ranking Member Lipinski, and Ranking Member Veazey, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Research and Technology and the Subcommittee on Energy. I thank you for taking up this important issue and for the opportunity to address the members and share with the Department of Energy, in collaboration with the Department of Veterans Affairs, is trying to do at the intersection of next-generation artificial intelligence, supercomputing, U.S. innovation, and veterans' health. At the Department of Energy, driven by where our missions are heading, we work at the forefront of technologies, and today we are embracing artificial intelligence. This coincides with diminishing returns from Moore's Law, where squeezing the most out of our 70-year supercomputing paradigm remains important. This post-Moore's Law era necessitates novel artificial intelligence or AI-inspired architectures to navigate an increasingly data-driven world. I believe that a cornerstone for progress will be how rapidly we embrace a next generation of AI-enabled predictive supercomputing tools. Precision medicine data can accelerate this technology change by driving the development with likely the world's most complex data. This brings with it subject matter experts and unique opportunities to rethink many of our traditional approaches, from post-Moore's Law hybrid architectures to uncertainty quantification to computer codes. Our work with the VA is underpinned by several opportunities for innovation that were captured in the 21st Century Cures Act, the Cancer Moonshot in 2016, and the National Strategic Computing Initiative in 2015. More recently, Secretary Perry's commitment to technology in the service of veterans, as well as this administration's commitment to veterans issues, has allowed the rethinking of traditional paradigms and facilitated novel approaches on how to solve complex problems. The VA has a unique data set of medical records, whole genomes, and imaging data that is one of the most comprehensive in dimensions of time, scale, and breadth, and in many aspects, this data set is considered to be the largest and most comprehensive in the world. Both the VA and the Department of Energy are alert to the unique privacy and security sensitivities of the veterans' health data. Today, our artificial intelligence-driven big data science initiative includes MVP Champion and a complementary effort called Active. Last year in April, VA and DOE scientists, physicians, and leadership came together to develop technical roadmaps for driving high-performance computing and artificial intelligence while developing solutions to priority issues in caring for our veterans. VA priorities that were identified that could deliver early impacts were patient-specific analysis for suicide prevention, helping doctors make decisions around prostate cancer, and enhanced prediction and diagnosis of cardiovascular disease. Since then, additional areas of interest from polypharmacy to traumatic brain injury have surfaced. The FY19 VA budget request includes $27 million to support these initiatives. We recognize the critical role of the private sector in this effort. Recently, the VA and DOE held a meeting with technology startups focused on precision medicine to understand the direction of the technology in the commercial sector. As with the Human Genome Project or the Exascale Initiative today, partnerships with labs, academia, and the private sector are important. A concerted effort here will lead to innovation tied to design and development of DOE's next-generation supercomputing that will merge big data, artificial intelligence, and high-performance computing. To better healthcare via our strategy for precision medicine through supercomputing and artificial intelligence that could inform when and how to treat our veterans to improve outcomes and control cost. To better science via a cadre of researchers and clinicians who specialize in healthcare with DOE experts in big data, AI, and high-performance computing. And to better government via interagency collaborations bringing to bear the full capabilities and expertise within public and private partnerships. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, and we now recognize Mr. Meek for his testimony.
Chairwoman Comstock and Ranking Member Lipinski of the Subcommittee on Research and Technology, Chairman Weber and Ranking Member Johnson of the Subcommittee on Energy, and members of both subcommittees, thank you for having me here today. On September 11, 2001, I was running floor trading operations for Goldman Sachs at Ground Zero in New York City. As I watched the first responders running into the carnage of that day, I resolved to do something to give back to those who serve. I'm still a financial services executive, now at S&P Global, but in the years since that day, my passion project has become SoldierStrong. SoldierStrong is a 501c3 charitable organization committed to improving the lives of our servicemen, women, and veterans. I chair the organization and accomplish most of its work from a cell phone and an iPad on my daily commute to New York. SoldierStrong's work started with a request from a forward operating base in Afghanistan to send basic supplies like tube socks and baby wipes for our forward deployed troops. Over the years, we assembled and sent over 75,000 pounds of supplies to 73 units in Iraq and Afghanistan. As the wars wound down, we contemplated closing down until one of our board members asked whether the troops we had served had everything they needed when they came back home to start life anew as veterans. In retrospect, one day in particular would bring this question into focus for me. April 27th, 2011 was my daughter's 5th birthday. We celebrated like many families with cake and ice cream without a care in the world. 6,800 miles away, Army Sergeant Dan Rose was being medevaced from the battlefield to Kandahar. The vehicle he was in hit an IED, and his injuries would rob him the ability to walk again. Dan's experience that day was a personal reminder of how much we owe our veterans and how their sacrifices allow all of us to take for granted the lives we are blessed to live here. 2 years after his injury, Dan would become the first recipient of our soldier suit, empowering him to walk once again. Today, SoldierStrong finds the most advanced mobility devices and prosthetics on the market and makes them available to injured veterans who otherwise would not have access to them. The collection of devices we currently fund comprise the Soldier Suit, which covers full body, upper body, and lower body mobility devices. One example is the Exosuit, which allows paralyzed veterans to stand and walk again with robotic assistance. The physical and psychological impacts of being able to get up out of a wheelchair and stand at eye level with the world again are profound. In fact, we are partnering with the Denver VA to conduct a formal study on the mental health impacts of access to this technology. Another example is the Luke arm, which is the first and only prosthetic arm that replaces the full range of motion from the shoulder through the elbow to the wrist to the fingers in the hand. It is the first arm that works just like the original equipment. As with many advanced technologies, these devices tend to be extremely expensive, with our average device costing nearly $100,000. Two of our more capable devices cost nearly $200,000 each. We've learned over the years that most of these devices were first developed for frontline servicemen and women via DARPA. America's commitment to putting cutting-edge technology on our warfighters is exceptional. It is a point of national pride and should extend, but currently does not, to our veterans who bear the physical consequences of service to our country. We work closely with more than a dozen VA medical centers around the country which have received one or more of our devices. The people of the VA care very deeply about our veterans, but are sometimes held back by arcane regulations that have not kept pace with modern technological advancement. Thanks to SoldierStrong, nearly 25,000 veterans have access to one of these devices. We believe every injured veteran has earned the right to the best technology American ingenuity can provide. Yet one of the tragedies of the post-9/11 veteran care is that too many veterans must rely on charitable organizations like ours for the access to the medical help they need. Though it sounds like science fiction, it really hits you that these capabilities are quite real when you see a veteran roll into a room in a wheelchair, but stand for the first time in years and actually walk back out of that same room. I have with me a short video how this technology works. This video was made during one of our device donations to the Richmond VA. Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, this video concludes my remarks today. I look forward to answering questions from the subcommittee. Thank you. SoldierStrong's mission in the field and on the home front is to help our soldiers take their next steps forward. We've done that with socks and baby wipes for our troops at forward operating bases. We're doing that with veterans looking to fill the gap in the GI Bill and finish their education. Today, we're here to fund a particularly exciting part of that mission. Today, we're here to execute our mission in the most literal way. SoldierStrong is very proud to partner with Exobionics and the Richmond VA to provide a revolutionary piece of equipment for our viewers. A piece of equipment that just a few years ago would have been possible only in a science fiction movie.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. MacCallum.
To turn on the microphone. I'm new at these things. Chairman Comstock, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Lipinski, and Ranking Member Johnson, members of the committee, thank you so much for having me here today. In my work, I am fortunate to speak with generals, military leaders, and Pentagon officials, Navy SEALs, and Green Berets, as well as many other great men and women who serve or have served our country. In fact, yesterday I spoke with Vice President Pence, who was very interested in the subject matter of our discussion here today, and in particular the work of Mr. Wordin and also the work of SoldierStrong and the U.S. technology that can grow and benefit our veterans and other members of society. Like most of us, as a citizen, I am enormously grateful to them for their service and humbled by their sacrifice, knowing that as much as I love my country, I could never live up to the measure of their bravery and heroism. Like most of us, I want to show my gratitude to those who put their lives on the line, those who make the sacrifices, who face the danger, who go to the front lines to protect us and the freedom that we cherish as Americans. SoldierStrong was born out of 9/11, out of Chris Meek's desire to prove to our patriots that we are forever thankful. That what we do as citizens and as a country, through what we do as citizens and as a country, is to make sure that we are willing to move forward in combat and that they will now be able to move forward in life. Whatever they lost on the battlefield or in injuries after they served, we can help them overcome to the greatest of our ability. 9/11 was a day that changed us forever. As a lifelong New York, New Jersey resident, I watched as the towers came down, and with them, the lives of people that I knew. The families of those who were lost, 13 fathers and 1 mother from my hometown. I vowed that day to tell the story of the war on terror and the battles that continue, and to support those who heard the call of President Bush when he said, "The people who knock these buildings down will hear from all of us soon." The men and women of our armed forces made that message heard loud and clear. Some paid the ultimate price, carrying that message to our enemies. So when Chris Meek came to see me about the organization that he had started with the simple mission of sending basic supplies to our troops to show them we cared, and how that mission evolved into opening up a world of possibility for our injured patriots when they came back home, I was in. I joined the advisory board in 2014 and have been dedicated to using my voice and the platform that I have through my work to raise awareness and support and to spread the word about cutting-edge technologies emerging in this field and the life-changing impact that they can have for those to whom I owe so much. The response has been incredible. I believe our viewers and Americans across this country want better for our veterans, better than a system that leaves gaps and does not allow them access to the ingenuity of these new devices. I will never forget the day that Sergeant Dan Rose came to our studio to demonstrate how his soldier suit allowed him to get up from his wheelchair and take the steps that he never dreamed he would be able to take again. The look on his face said it all: will, possibility, and promise. As Americans, we must make sure that we give back, but give back in a way that is uniquely American, that relies on this cutting-edge technology and never take no for an answer. As JFK once said about the U.S. space mission, we choose to go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. We live in a time when Iron Man is not just a movie. It is a moment when technology made in America can rebuild arms with full mobility and allow bodies with severed spinal cords to stand up and walk. Companies like Exobionics, Bionics, Mobius Bionics, and Myomo are leading the way. But there is still a long way to go, and we will do it, not because it is easy, but because it is hard, and because it is the right thing to do. Embracing this technology is a winner for the United States, for our military, and for those who will benefit from the growth of these industries and the jobs that it creates here at home as well. It makes sense on every level. Thanks to the work of a very lean and dedicated team, SoldierStrong operates on a budget that puts just 9 to 12% towards operating costs. More than 80% goes directly to bringing this technology to more than 25,000 veterans at rehab centers and VA facilities across the country so far. SoldierStrong has donated more than $2.5 million in high-technology medical devices that directly help our injured armed forces, and $500,000 towards scholarships for those whose way forward is through education that opens doors for the next steps in their lives. I encourage you to think about how the funding that supports our fighting forces in the field can be extended to support the extraordinary research that's being done with taxpayer funding that will ensure that injured veterans have access to the scientific advances that come from it. I thank you very much for your time today and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And we now hear from Mr. Wordin.
Good morning, Chairman Comstock, Chairman Weber, and ranking members Lipinski and VC, and distinguished members of the Energy, Research, and Technology Committee. I'd like to introduce Dr. Farzan Sasangahar, Industrial and Systems Engineer, Texas A&M, and we also have with us some veterans from the Project Hero Walter Reed Hub program here today. Project Hero is an organization that brings our nation's veterans and first responders together through sports, activities, and community, helping them overcome challenges associated with their visible and invisible wounds. Being a catalyst for the adaptive sports movement, Project Hero continues to be the industry leader. Dedicated research, including a Georgetown University study of Project Hero methods, confirms that the work being carried out since its inception is changing and improving the lives of tens of thousands of veterans, first responders, and their families. Remember, the veterans volunteer, the families are drafted. Our mission is to save lives by restoring hope, recovery, and resilience to America's finest. We've had a tremendous impact. 62% of our program participants reduce or eliminate their prescription drug use, including opioids and antidepressants. PTSD-related stress attacks, as measured by the Hero Track, are reduced by 83%. The annual Project Hero participant saves the VA more than $9,000, including prescription drugs, in healthcare costs annually. A soon-to-be-released report reviewed 3,000 suicides to evaluate the cause and effect and recommend steps to improve care to our veterans, and provides data to show why 20 veterans commit suicide each day. What are the risk factors, diagnosis, and family components that are at the root cause of suicide? The review found that diagnoses most common in all suicides are depression, PTSD, anxiety, and alcohol use disorder, with the average suicide having multiple diagnoses. The top risk factors are pain, access to firearms, worsening of health status, relationship problems, hopelessness, and decline in physical ability. Most of the suicides were not identified as high risk in their medical records. Of the 20 suicides per day, only 3 were receiving VA mental health services at the time of their death. The reasons? Inconvenience, long wait times, paperwork, transportation, and stigma. The top recommendation of this report is to come up with an enhanced suicide risk assessment and safety planning capability that addresses the complex care needs of our veterans, utilizing technology, clinician training, and extending more into the community. There is a need for a more systematic assessment tool that can document risk. The Hero Track initiative solves this vital need for a technology-based objective solution for suicide prevention and mental health care. Currently, no PTSD tool exists with remote capabilities to complement ongoing treatment. The Hero Track will be an FDA-approved device that will allow continuous monitoring and detection of PTSD triggers using physiological sensors and machine learning algorithms, and can measure frequency, severity, and duration of a PTSD episode within 2 to 4 seconds. The Hero Track is a wearable monitor developed by Texas A&M and Dr. Sasangahar and tested exclusively at Project Hero events to learn a user's physiological cues. Our goal will be to prevent and eliminate suicide in military, veteran, and first responder population, provide the active duty component with a long-term focus on improving the overall readiness of the force by providing better health and healthcare analytics, and provide support for survivors of sexual trauma and other mental health diagnoses with the care they need. The result will be better therapeutic outcomes at less cost. Using a combination of heart rate and heart rate variability monitoring, the PTSD alarm will identify triggers. The tool creates a personalized profile that monitors patterns and variability to infer a PTSD episode. If an episode is detected, alarm vibration goes off with a visual prompt that the user will set up 4 options of support. Self-resiliency tools, they can connect to a no vet alone peer-to-peer support network that they program into the watch themselves, which can include family, friends, or clinicians. It can automatically call the VA crisis hotline or 911. The device pairs with a smartphone and it can interface with a website to offer more features, including direct connect to peers, military command, or clinicians, either by phone or video as desired. The user will be able to share information with peers in their social network that they wish to create for their own personal support system. The device can best be utilized when a person first joins the active duty military to create a baseline and then constantly and consistently collect data on the mental and physical health, record stress events, traumas during their service. The advantage is to maintain objective rather than subjective data and feedback and integrate this information into one's electronic medical records. This biometric collective data can then provide a medical clinician with a complete mental and physical health picture whenever the participant visits their healthcare provider, thereby understanding whether the prescription drugs they've been using are actually working, or whether the care path that they've been put on by their VA or active duty clinician is actually working. The overall advantage is a more comprehensive, objective measurement of their disability metrics that will lead to increased abilities and a better care continuum. For the patient, it's a creative way for them and their family to understand the environment and surroundings that cause stress episodes in their life. They can look back at the minute, the 5 minute, the 30 minutes prior to a PTSD episode and understand what was the trigger. Up on the screen, we have some of the screenshots of the app that the device pairs with, so you can see your data. On here, you can see your heart rate, your resting heart rate, your physical activity, the number of stress events, and also your tools. There will be provided accurate information on the mental and physical state of mind. It will be a patient-centered device that provides a 24/7 support network with medical resiliency and peer-to-peer support if you have a PTSD episode. It's GPS enabled, so if you become disoriented or pass out, the person who's been alerted to your PTSD episode will be able to know exactly where you are. A peer-to-peer support can provide motivation, feedback, and the support of knowing that you're not alone. For the clinicians, it provides a complete mental and physical health care picture of their patients, a more comprehensive measurement with disability metrics which lead to increased abilities and provide a more informed care continuum. Up on the screen, we have actual data that was driven from one of our testing where you can see how a PTSD episode would look to a clinician. It starts out during sleep, and then you can see the spike in their heart rate that causes the alarm to go off. And it also knows the difference between physical activity and an actual episode. For the DoD, it creates a baseline that consistently and constantly collects data on their mental and physical health so that they can know the readiness of their troops before going on deployment. It maintains objective data and feedback on the overall readiness of the force, and that information could be integrated into their electronic medical records. The most important need we have right now as a nation is to prevent more suicides and improve the mental health of those who serve our country. Although the conflicts may be winding down, there is a lifelong commitment we owe to these men and women. The Hero Track is vital to that commitment to assure that they can see their children grow up in a supportive community. We all understand the need to reduce suicide and improve mental health for veterans that live and work in each of our districts. There are veterans in your district right now that can be saved by utilizing the Hero Track. Thank you very much for your time.
And we'll now hear from Dr. Major.
Thank you. I'd first like to thank Chairman Barbara Comstock, Ranking Member Daniel Lipinski, Chairman Randy Weber, and Ranking Member Mark Veazey for the invitation to testify. I also want to recognize Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Johnson for joining us this morning. There exists a large and growing number of veterans with neurological or musculoskeletal pathology who rely on VA rehabilitative care for functional restoration. When medically indicated, an interdisciplinary clinical team delivers custom prostheses or orthoses and implements therapies to train veterans on how to use these devices effectively and ensure long-term rehabilitation success. I currently conduct studies on the factors that underlie balance and fall risk in persons with upper and lower limb loss. We do not yet fully understand why nearly 50% of community living persons with limb loss fall at least once per year, many of whom experience a fall-related injury. This has considerable implications to veteran quality of life and VA healthcare costs. My studies aim to identify factors that are useful for fall risk screening and modifiable through balanced targeted interventions. Uniquely, these studies utilize technologies for assessing how prosthesis users respond to walking disturbances. Moreover, these platforms can deliver therapies to train users on how to manage disturbances and avoid falls. I'll provide two examples. In this first example, we use a robot that applies a controlled pull to the pelvis through a system of motors and cables. But we're interested in the lessons that can be learned from the unique strategies of the individuals you see here. In the second example, we see use of an interactive system, which provides both virtual and augmented reality as a means to deliver walking disturbances. The system is used to deliver physical training that requires controlled movements and is combined with cognitive behavioral therapy as part of a holistic treatment. Now, the remaining projects focus on development and evaluation of prosthetic devices. We're addressing the unique prosthetic needs of women with limb loss and developing prostheses that can accommodate changes in footwear. We're also developing a new method to deliver personalized prosthetic feet and knees based on an individual's body structure and activity level. Finally, we're designing technology to suspend prostheses from the amputated limb using vacuum suction to improve mobility and limb health. While prosthetic and orthotic technology is advancing rapidly due to progress in robotics and material science, the most critical aspect to successful rehabilitation are the veterans using these devices. Research and development has granted us the ability to empower veterans with functional impairments, but understanding how veterans interact with this technology is crucial. Therefore, we should support parallel research efforts on development of technology and its clinical application. The success of the rehabilitation process is dependent on clinicians' use of evidence-based practice, which is generated from quality clinical research that considers the holistic needs of patients. Furthermore, veteran rehabilitation does not end once they are fitted with a device and deployed into the community. Real-world use of this technology provides a window into rehabilitation progress and quality of life. Advances in wearable sensors have improved our ability to collect data on community-based outcomes, such as activity level and participation. Research is needed to explore ways in which we can best integrate sensors into devices to monitor user status with minimal interruption to daily activity. We also need to examine how these data can guide device designs and rehabilitation strategies to better support independent function. Overall, veteran rehabilitation research must continue to be interdisciplinary to accelerate its progress, integrating science from engineering and medicine. I argue that we still lack a thorough understanding of the interaction between the human elements and rehabilitation technology. That more research is needed to better understand A, how the body responds to different prosthetic and orthotic designs, B, which therapies are most effective, and C, what the long-term outcomes of rehabilitation are on veteran health and quality of life. Filling these gaps will improve personalized rehabilitation interventions and help close the loop between technology and clinical practice. Ultimately, I believe that technology is driving us towards a future where we can fine-tune rehabilitation interventions with extreme precision, accuracy, and speed. Devices and therapies will be personalized based on individual patient characteristics, and smart prostheses and orthoses will collect diagnostic data through onboard sensors. And clinicians will use these data to monitor rehabilitation progress and design interventions, while the devices themselves will automatically adjust in real time to meet the demands of daily activity. Combined with advances in telehealth, therapies will be administered remotely without traveling to a clinic, thereby improving access to care. Real-time monitoring and remote intervention delivery will promote rehabilitation of veterans while permitting continued community engagement. Our end goal is to restore the greatest level of independence, ambulation, and quality of life to veterans, which reflects a main priority of the VHA. I once again thank the Research and Technology Subcommittee and the Energy Subcommittee for this opportunity to testify, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Great. Thank you all so much. What inspiring work you're all doing, and the innovation is really exciting. So I, kind of picking up when we had our Veterans Roundtable yesterday, one of the things was how we can integrate these services. So I was wondering, first of all, Mr. Wordin, and then I wanted to kind of ask everyone this question: what 3 things can we do? Maybe give us some action items for each of you to get what you're working on advanced and out to more of our veterans.
Well, the first thing is easy. It's funding. I mean, the technology groups, I think, in all the speeches talked about funding and the need for more funding for technology because it will have such a large impact. I mean, we talked yesterday in the forum about how, for example, people are trying to justify or understand how valuable equine therapy is. Well, if every participant was wearing a HeroTrack device, you'd be able to tell immediately the overall mental and physical impact that therapy was having on that particular person. And so then you can make better informed decisions as both a patient, as a clinician, as a Congress, on where to appropriate and prioritize that funding. Technology will continue to evolve, and I would say that's the second issue, is as technology evolves, particularly our device will become even more powerful. As phones become more powerful, as the wearable technology becomes more powerful, the battery life improves, the reliability of the algorithm improves, the device will become even more efficient and even more valuable. And then the third thing is just being able to work within the VA system, which I think is the biggest source of frustration for veterans. In that study that was quoted, where they talked about inconvenience, long wait times, paperwork, transportation, and stigma, the VA has its challenges, but also the way that VA treats nonprofits, outside groups, and how we can interact with them is very, very complicated. I mean, we're lucky. We're one of the few. We were the first with Secretary Shulkin to be a authorized mental health and suicide prevention program of the VA. But even with that official designation, we still have a hard time working with individual VA medical centers. And so how can we fix, I don't even know if fix is the right word, but how can we make it so that while it's a lot easier to deal with the active duty component with DOD, it's very, very complicated with the VA, and it's still the federal government. There's still supposed to be one rule book.
Okay. And Ms. MacCallum and Mr. Meek, what has been your experience in working with the VA, and how can we help advance? And obviously, I think we all agree, getting more funding directed into this, but how can we integrate better? Good.
Sorry, just looking at the VA request for 2019, $198 billion, $727 million of that request is for medical prosthetic research. So funding is clearly one of the big issues. And when I think about SoldierStrong, there's 170 VA medical centers in the country, and this goes to what Mr. Wordin was saying. We have devices in 12 of them so far. So the issue of scale and scaling up so that these devices are more available to veterans across the country is clearly one of the big goals here. And then, in terms of what I do, I just think communication and helping people to understand across the country what our veterans go through when they get home. I mean, I think that's a message that we need to continue to spread, and that's something that, I would like to see more news organizations spend more time on, and that's an effort that I would make. I look at one of the quotes from one of the veterans that we've spoken to. He said, you feel like a burden and you avoid social situations. So that alone is such a hampering factor to moving forward. So we want to find a way to, help veterans feel especially when they're using these devices, that they're not in the way, that they're normal, that they're part of society. And I think raising awareness through greater communication is something that will go a long way to that.
Oh, thank you.
I think to agree with Mr. Wordin, I think the two things that you can do are first to pass legislation, making this technology available to all veterans, but more importantly is finding the appropriations. It's one thing to pass a bill, but if you can't pay for it, it's not going to do anybody any good. You know, there's several great organizations up here all doing some great things, but at the end of the day, we're all fighting for the same private sector, private donor dollar. There's only so much of that out there, and so getting help from people like yourself in this committee will really help transform the lives of those veterans who need it.
And I think one of the things I think you've all demonstrated and testified a little to, when these devices and these things are made available, when if it's lowering PTSD, if it improves outcome, we actually do have long-term savings here from, as well as obviously improved quality of life and the right thing to do. So there is a win-win result from this.
Well, and as you mentioned before, a lot of these devices were originally funded through DARPA. And what we're finding now is that there's no DARPA for veterans when they come back home. And so that's what I think organizations like ours are trying to backfill here, is to step up and fill that void.
Okay. Thank you very much. I see my time is up. Now I recognize Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you. I want to thank all the witnesses for their testimony. A lot of interesting work in different areas that help our veterans with technology. I wanted to start with Dr. Major. You mentioned the potential of smart prosthesis that can incorporate onboard sensors and real-world data to improve rehabilitation progress and design interventions. What are the current challenges that the field faces in achieving the goal of smart prosthesis, and what federal resources are needed or could be leveraged to reach this target?
Great, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think in terms of the challenges that we face necessarily, it's difficult actually to find ways to effectively integrate these sensors. I mean, there are a lot of sensors that are available. Miniaturization of these sensors actually helped provide the ability to be able to include them in such devices like these. But again, I think what we're lacking is once the sensors are actually included is trying to essentially use that mapping between the data that is being derived from real-world use and what that essentially means and how we should direct that to how these devices either interact with the patients, help the user, learn from the user, and improve their mobility, essentially. So I think there's still some gaps that are missing in terms of research. A lot of this is essentially basic research in the sense that, again, once the data is available, how do you effectively use it? And I think we need to make certain that research is being directed in the way that we can answer some of those questions to fill those gaps. Because again, the sensor technology has improved dramatically. And it's rapidly advancing. And so they're getting smaller and smaller. And our ability to include them in devices such as prostheses and orthoses at this point is much improved. And I don't necessarily think that's one of the bigger challenges. Now, powering those devices, powering those sensors, that is a challenge, of course, because they do require onboard battery power as well. And obviously, in advances in battery power and miniaturizing that technology will obviously help in this case. But again, you know, research does need to be directed to answer those questions on how we use the data effectively, how we can do that, collect the data, how clinicians can then use the data, but at the same time also protecting the privacy of the patient, right? Because once you have all this data that is streaming in, one of the important things, obviously, is to make sure that patient privacy is being considered in that case.
Are we training are we adequately training the next generation of scientists to do this work that's needed? This reaches across a lot of different areas. Do you think we're doing an adequate job of that? Do we need to do more and focus? Well, do we need to do more there?
Yeah, I'd be hesitant to speak more broadly, but in my experience, I think we are. I think one of the benefits of this type of research that it is interdisciplinary, and we need to make sure that it continues to be so, right? Because again, it is this combination of engineering and medicine, but we need to start, of course, integrating other disciplines as well, whether that's material science, robotics, psychology, whatever it might be. But we need to make sure that we're still promoting that type of integrative, interdisciplinary research to make sure that we're staying competitive and we're advancing the progress of this particular science. So I think we are doing an excellent job. Of course, we can always do better. And as long as we continue on this track, I think this particular research will remain competitive and we'll be able to take the steps that we need to elevate this type of technology.
Moving on, it's it's great to see, Mr. Wordin, the work that you're doing there with Hero Track. I mean, we still, the veteran suicide data is inconclusive. Still trying to understand this. What does what does Hero Track really provide in that direction? But what else more can you think can be done to leverage commercial technologies in order to do this?
Well, this report that's about to come out is pretty clear on what the root causes and diagnosis of suicide are. And when you get into depression, anxiety, hopelessness, those are all factors. And what we found in our research so far in our testing of the Hero Track is that veterans feel like they have a support system with them 24/7 right on their wrist, because it can connect to a loved one, a clinician, a family member, or a peer, so that if they have an episode, they're able to get help immediately, and it's something that they direct, so they're in control. And so the feedback that we've been getting from our focus groups has been really remarkable in the acceptance of being able to wear basically a technology monitoring device that understands what's going on with you mentally and physically. And so that power helps alleviate that hopelessness. So if you are feeling depressed, hey, if I have an episode, it automatically will text message my buddy from Iraq, or my wife, or my girlfriend, or my father, or whatever you particularly program in, and that ability really creates that sliver of hope that's the difference between suicide and not suicide.
All right, well, thank you very much. My time is up. A lot of things to talk about here, but I thank all of you for the work that you're doing.
And I now recognize Mr. Weber.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Dr. Kusnezov, in your prepared testimony, you talked about how the DOE national labs have a history of research collaboration and the ability to confront short and long-term complex science challenges. Hold that thought in mind for just 1 second. Ms. MacCallum, you said you talked to a vet who felt a stigma when trying to interact with...
Going out, in socializing, in being in a wheelchair and trying to get around people and feeling that he was, quote, in the way.
Perfect. Mr. Wordin, you listed all of the causes of suicide, and you have that list available for us where we can get that later. Anxiety, depression. Was stigma one of those causes?
No, but stigma is one of the reasons why they don't receive VA medical services.
Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Kusnezov, back to you. The DOE has a history of working with some of those other agencies. We said earlier, I think, quite frankly, Mr. Wordin, you said that the VA has trouble working with outside groups. Well, I would proffer up the point that the Department of Energy does not, and they do a lot of good research. So I'm coming back to you, Doctor. I've got a point to this dialogue here. How does the department and the national labs benefit from performing data analytics and computational research on behalf of the VA? And then how do we meld this problem together? We'll come back to you all later. Go ahead.
Thank you. That's the right question to ask. For us, the data, with its unique complexity that comes with subject matter experts, that is curated by experts, brings with it a team of specialists that allows us to attack the artificial intelligence and technology challenge with our experts. And so the meeting, the intersection happens at that place where we look at the priority questions that the Veterans Administration has surfaced. We bring together the technology specialists, the hardware, the software, the engineers, and ask, how do we answer those questions?
And many times those are outside industry and groups. Keep going.
Yes. So the nexus is the two agencies coming together. We draw from the breadth of the laboratories. We engage the private sector and academia as needed. We bring in as many people as we can because we recognize it's going to be an all-of-the-above type of activity to answer these priority areas that the Veterans Administration has defined.
So, I mean, actually, that's a perfect marriage, if you will, and that we have that ability and we're able to do that. And then thereby do away with the stigma, do away with the non-ability to not work with outside groups, and to make this as seamless as possible. I'm still going to come back to you for one more. These research partnerships have the potential to accelerate scientific breakthroughs in healthcare delivery systems and sciences. Should the department replicate this model in other fields of research, and what steps can we as Congress take to facilitate that?
So I think the answer is yes in terms of replication. Our focal point right now has been on the veterans' health data and on the precision medicine data set because of its unique complexities, because it comes with annotations, with handwritten notes, with data streams and imagery and the collections of multimodal data that talks to a situation in unique ways that was going to test how we develop predictive technologies, artificially intelligent-based computing. When we start to get our head around what those hardware and software technologies are, these are ones we want to apply to other areas. But we find that the highest leverage opportunity for us is around this data set because it draws in so many other partners who want to come, who want to participate, and it's a force multiplier for our activities.
Well, that brings me to another question then. So do you see any problems with the DOE and the VA working together?
No, not at all. On the beginning of April, Secretary Perry and Acting Secretary Wilkie did sign a new MOA to work together that we have started to implement now. It identifies more data than we already have resident that we plan to aggregate, so we have a very nice path forward.
What process would you use to report back to Congress in other words, to say, look, this is working, we're making huge steps in the right direction? How do we get that from you?
I think at your discretion, coming to you with the VA side by side would be an effective means to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go ahead and yield back at this time.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Vesey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask a couple of questions on data privacy and cybersecurity. Dr. Kusnezov, the information collected for the Big Data Science Initiative is obviously very sensitive information. Almost 600,000 veterans have voluntarily given DNA and other samples that can be used. And what I want to know is how is the VA and the DOA working together to implement federal requirements for cybersecurity?
Thank you very much. I would add to your list of the veterans who have signed up, the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Perry, also joined personally in May of 2017, donating his DNA and his medical records to the set. So security, of course, is important. The Personal Health Information Enclave, the initial one we launched at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, is what's considered a moderate with enhanced controls under the FIPS 199 standard that meets both HIPAA and HITECH Act requirements. So we've set up an enclave consistent with the protection standards, but in addition, through our CIO office, through our cybersecurity specialists and privacy specialists, we do external reviews of the enclave. We also have engaged the VA counterparts in the information security offices for their assessment of how we protect the data. In addition, we're very sensitive to appropriate use. Housing the data is one thing, but who gains access is done through training programs. We identify laboratory people who will be engaged, but we run that through the VA. We have created teams, VA and DOE laboratory scientists, who are attacking the key problems that the VA has surfaced. The members of the teams that are allowed to access the data is controlled by the VA once we go through the training requirements. And so just housing the data doesn't give anyone access to the data. We worry about the control, we worry about the use of the data for the purpose, and we monitor that through IRB processes as well. So, we've set up certainly an enterprise sensitive to the use and protection of the data for the very reason you remarked.
With you putting in all those parameters to protect the information, are there any challenges to accessing the complete medical records of veterans when need be? I guess I would want to know, is it easily accessible, quickly accessible in situations where it needs to be?
So there are two parts to your question. Technically, it is easy to access now. In terms of the tools, the infrastructure we've set up, hardware and software, the learning environment. What is still a bit of a challenge is the IRB process. What we've been doing here is new. Every step we take is new for everybody in terms of how we access data, and I think as we try and create the IRB structure for accessing veterans' data, we're sensitive to the fact that machine learning and artificial intelligence will kind of invert the world that people are used to. Normally, when you have a researcher looking at data, they will pull the specific data they want to address a particular problem. If you're trying to learn from more than 22 million veterans' health records that span decades, from genomic data, from images, and so on, and apply machine learning, the way you access the patterns of use are quite different than how anyone else has ever looked at this data. And so walking through the IRB and setting up the right protocols to allow access is a process that we're still working through. So we've done some. We can technically access the data. We have accesses and controls in place. But the policy side, we are still working through how we get everyone to think about where the future is in terms of learning from data.
Yeah, thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
And I now recognize Mr. Rohrbacher.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses today. This is not directly on technology, but it's dealing with the VA issues. Some of the things that you're describing that have motivated you to focus on trying to find technological solutions, like depression, sense of hopelessness, et cetera, a lot of that can be traced, some of us believe, to the use of opiates by the VA. And some of us believe that the VA has taken the easy way out simply by prescribing opiates to somebody with a problem, which when you prescribe that kind of drug, you're going to end up with someone with serious problems. Now, just a question, should the VA be permitted to use cannabis? Should they have that as an option rather than just opiates? And I got some other questions that go directly to technology, but could I have your opinions on that? Just a no, yes, no, or something like that?
All right, I'll jump in.
Okay. Should cannabis be an option for VA in terms of treatment of our folks rather than just opiates? Well, it's not just opiates. We're doing opiates.
I understand your question.
Okay, you got it.
Well, I've been doing this for 10 years.
Yes.
And I've had over 30,000 veterans come through my program. And I will tell you unequivocally that many of the veterans in our program use cannabis. And they use it as an alternative to opioids.
Is that good?
It seems to be working because they're all still alive.
All right, does anybody else have opinion on that? Okay, I won't force you into coming publicly on that. Okay, yes, there are controversial issues. I would suggest that it is sinful that we do not permit our veterans that option. The veterans, if doctors, I know I know a number of veterans who the doctors have had to pull aside and go to them in their, in a off-campus, situation where they could then recommend marijuana, and it's ridiculous that we have to put doctors in a situation like that where they can't even recommend what they think is the right treatment. Mr. Meek, I should say, you mentioned that it is difficult for medical devices to get approval. And maybe you could give us some, we find that same true with commercial items as well, like the FDA and others, and as well as other regulatory things that are, could you give us a little more detail on that?
Sure, and you talked about the FDA specifically, and I'll reference the exosuit, which is the primary device that we fund. There are certainly, you have to go through many phases of the clinical trials, then you have to go through different phases for FDA approval, and that takes years. I mean, literally years.
And people are suffering during those years by
Exactly.
some. And do you have an example of a device that was left behind or delayed so much that people were left to suffer?
Well, again, just not to be a dead horse, but the exosuit, this has proven to, I know one specific veteran from Iowa who was told he'd never walk again, and going through 6 months of rehab in the Minneapolis VA with a device we donated, he was able to walk his daughter down the aisle at her wedding. So it does work.
Let me just note that I had serious troubles with my arms, and I know a lot of veterans get this as well. Actually, all the cartilage was gone. I'm a surfer, and I ended up surfing all the cartilage away in my arms. I know how painful that was, and what's really helped is I have had shoulder replacements that were, I believe, developed to help our veterans, and now they've helped all of us. Do we have a situation where veterans are having to wait? Because I know how painful that was. Are our veterans having to wait to use the technology that we've developed?
I think the question is whether they're actually getting the technology via the VA or through private facilities. So private rehabilitation facilities will get it much more quickly, and it's much more accessible than going through the VA process of them going through the FDA approvals, whether to get the funding or not, because it doesn't come from VA here in Washington. It's each individual VA has its own budget, and so it's up to them to figure out what they deem appropriate or necessary for their veterans' care, and so that's where we step in.
Well, new technologies and new medicines are really elongated in the process for us to use them. And when you mentioned batteries, about how new batteries will probably help in many of these challenges that we face for helping the disabled, let me just note that there are new batteries on the way, and Dr. Goodenough, the inventor of the lithium battery, has had a major breakthrough that should have an incredible impact on the things we're talking about. But then again, we have to make sure that the FDA approves the use of these batteries, and everybody else approves the innovation all the way down. So I'm very pleased that you alerted us to the bureaucratic problems that have to be overcome in utilizing new technologies for our veterans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I now recognize Ms. Esty for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to thank the Chairwoman and Ranking Member Lipinski and Chairman Weber and Ranking Member Veazey for joining us here today. As a member of both the Science, Space, and Technology Committee and the Veterans Committee, I want to thank all of you for your important work here today and give a real shout out to Mr. Meek and SoldierStrong, based in Connecticut, and we're really grateful for the work that you've done. All of us in Connecticut know people who died in the Twin Towers, and that's a searing memory, and your commitment to that. My niece was one of those who answered that call and served in Afghanistan, and I know how important the work all of you are doing. I think it was you, Mr. Meek, mentioned no DARPA for the VA. And Dr. Major, you've also talked about the VA. The VA has aging facilities doing research. So I have a couple of questions here. So I'm going to ask all of you to say whether you think there ought to be a DARPA for the VA, or rather whether we should be using DARPA as it exists, but task them with VA-specific goals, because that's what's happening around exoskeletons. I mean, that early work was around exoskeletons. Through DARPA, they've kind of dropped it. It's now been left for VA to pursue. So quick, if people could opine on that, please.
If you don't mind, I'll begin. Yeah, I mean, essentially, in terms of funding mechanisms, I mean, we're obviously all for additional funding. The typical way that the mechanisms run in the VA, there are certain priorities that research is directed towards. I mean, for instance, the prosthetic needs of women, for example, that's something that's come about mainly because of that growing population of women veterans. But essentially, those type of priorities are fit into existing mechanisms, right? And I actually would look forward to something where there is maybe more targeted mechanisms, targeted funding mechanisms speaking specifically towards certain priorities. DARPA may be a way to do that, or some different formation similar to that, which could be implemented in the VA. And I think that would actually be quite effective. Again, maybe not DARPA in and of itself, but something that could work effectively in the VA that would allow individuals to target certain priorities. I think essentially that would help with the technology development, the advancement, and the implementation in the VA specifically, which I think is something that essentially is badly needed. So, thank you.
Mr. Wordin, I know that actually under Dr. Shulkin, his only clinical priority was on suicide prevention. You've talked about a lot of feedback information. A question I have for you is, you're collecting a huge amount of important information, and much of it tracks with what we know anecdotally, as well as, you know, the research beginning to be done about feedback. Do we have an ability to share, or how will we go about sharing that important information that basically you're developing with the privacy concerns and as proprietary to you? And so here's part of the challenge. We have innovative work being done in the private sector. In order to push it through all of VA, then we have these questions about access, who has access to the data, how do we safeguard it, and how do we share that information that you're developing that would help us develop better programs for veterans?
Okay, well, I'll tackle that in pieces. First off, under Secretary Shulkin and under President Trump, suicide prevention and mental health is the #1 priority. And yet there's no visible funding for technology that addresses those issues, not a single dime. So that's one area of concern that we have. With the testing that we're doing right now, we're collecting individual information, but we're not identifying the individuals. So it's a blind study, so there's no privacy concerns with that. With our program in general, we partner with the VA and we track particularly mental health status and suicide ideation of every participant in our program. And we have done that on a longitudinal basis for some time. And that information is contained or housed in their VA medical records. So we're able to deal with the privacy in that regard. So as long as the VA medical records are private and they have security, then the information that we're gaining will have that same security.
I want to follow up with you afterwards because we had some interesting testimony over in the Senate on gun violence issues and work that LA is doing through text to deal with students who have suicidal ideation and other issues. So I think there may be alternatives that we can look at that have been developed elsewhere that could help marry the technology that you're developing to connect to, say, the VA hotline. You know, how can we have an ability to connect, because that's one of those issues we've had. How do even people know about the VA hotline? Make sure you've got some staffed. I don't know if you've looked at that at all.
Well, actually, when we do our focus groups, and as the device has been developed, it has 4 options when you have a PTSD episode, whether it's self-resiliency, or it's contacting a family member or a peer, or whether it's contacting the VA hotline or 911. And what we find is that most veterans, I would say over 80% of veterans, would rather connect with a peer or a family member rather than a stranger on the VA crisis hotline.
That tracks with all the other research we have that they'd rather have peers. So again, I'm over time, but I really want to thank all of you for your important work on these initiatives and urge you to continue to bring your ideas forward so we can do a better job to serve those who have served this country. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Holmgren for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you all so much. This is really important. There's nothing more important that we can be doing than caring for our veterans, letting them have every opportunity for full lives that are fulfilling and continuing to be amazingly productive. So thank you for your work. Dr. Kusnezov, if I could first address a couple questions to you. A unique feature of the DOE-VA partnership is that the Oak Ridge National Lab Facility will be able to host protected VA health data. It's the only institution outside the VA to be able to do so. What steps is DOE taking to protect the personal information of our veterans? And Also, follow-up, should DOE also be allowed to host secure data from other sources such as private industry?
So thank you very much for that question. The data security piece is very important to us. Certainly compliance with HIPAA and high-tech are important. We have a process we put in place to secure the data in the enclave. It includes an annual external review from a third party that reports back to the feds, and then we provide the authority to operate the enclave. We engage our cybersecurity and privacy experts and counterparts from the VA to oversee all of this. So we're very careful about data use and protection for this enclave.
Do you think there is opportunity to host other secured data from other sources?
These are things we already do across DOE for many different reasons, from other agencies, for many different reasons. So yes, the simple answer is
great. DOE houses 4 of the top 10 fastest supercomputers in the world and is the principal federal agency for leadership in computing facilities. How will providing DOE with access to the VA data set benefit healthcare research, specifically for veterans?
I think what we've started to find in applying the basic existing tech tools in artificial intelligence is they break rather easily at the scales of the veterans data set. The complexities, the size, the amount of information contained already exceed what the standard tool sets are allowed to, can accommodate. DOE is very interested in pushing the limits of technology and supercomputing and AI, and these kinds of stresses are very interesting to us in terms of where the next generation of more cognitive tools will come from. So we're going to be pushing this data. The data itself is the mechanism in which we set up this next frontier of AI-inspired simulation.
Great. Dr. Major, thank you for being here. Grateful for your work. So proud of Northwestern and incredible accomplishments that continue to come out of your work and others' work there at Northwestern. So thanks for being with us. Getting older brings with it many challenges, including the danger of falls. Does your research provide any quantitative data on how much more of a danger this is to veterans in need of prosthesis or orthosis as compared to veterans who don't require such devices?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I'm not particularly aware of any research that has targeted specifically veterans of that nature and what that distinction is between those, again, who do use prosthetic devices and those who may not. In terms of falls and fall risk, that type of research I think is certainly needed. I think anything in terms of looking at specifically different types of veterans, the era which they come from, the combats which they maybe perhaps served, I think that particular research certainly would be helpful in trying to target certain rehabilitation technology, whether it's prosthetic and orthotic devices or other types of rehabilitation technology, in order to target that specifically to individual cohorts. I think it's something that can be done, and speaking again to some of the issues that were brought up today, the veteran statistics, the type of data that we have, because it is such an integrative healthcare system, it's ripe for that type of research essentially that cannot be conducted necessarily on a wider scale. I think that the resources we have available to us through the VHA is just a perfect opportunity to do that type of work, and some of which is currently being done, but again, I think we could take better opportunity of that.
Great. Quickly, Dr. Major, if I can follow up. Clearly, our goal is to continue to improve the quality of life of veterans, but also for all people. Wonder, with your research and work in prosthetics, how is it making its way to companies that develop such devices that could benefit from your findings and in turn provide better technologies to veterans and to all people?
Yeah, so one of the benefits that we have is oftentimes the partnerships that we develop through a lot of these research efforts. So just to use an example, my research in particular, even though it is directed through VA funding, it also includes partnerships with academia, for instance, so Northwestern University. In addition to that, even in industry partners as well. So much of the technology that is developed and the patents that are then developed through those efforts are jointly owned, right? So it would be owned by the VA as well as industry partners or academia as well. And so that is a way, that's a method in which the technology that is developed by funding supported through the VA that then can be brought out and benefit civilians. So we do a lot of that, in fact, and I think it's a great mechanism. I will say that, you know, in terms of technology transfer, I think if certain mechanisms could be developed within the VA to help advance that process, it would certainly be beneficial, because there is a lot of great technology that is developed in the VA, and these efforts and the funding through the VA does support that. But I think trying to get that out to the civilian population would certainly be of great benefit.
We'd love to see that. My time's expired. Thank you all so much for your work. I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. McInerney for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. I thank the committee for having this hearing, and I have to say I got excited listening to your testimony. But I'm going to start with Dr. Kusnezov, a federal government scientist who had worked for the VA since 1983, made more than $400 million when he sold a company for $11 billion to this pharmaceutical giant Gilead in 2012. The drug was then discovered the drug was discovered with federal resources and intended to treat veterans with hepatitis C. But unfortunately, once the drug was sold to the private company, it was out of reach for veterans and for the VA both. So as the VA and the DOE work together with the private sector, how do we also ensure that the data and technology resulting from taxpayer resources and labs is not exploited by startups and the private sector entities solely for the commercial gain for a few individuals?
Thank you. No, that's a great question. In our partnerships, there are some fundamental tenets we have. One is open source for the tools we create, for the very reason you mentioned. We do have some partnerships with pharma, for example, with GlaxoSmithKline right now, an effort called ATOM, which is also related to all of this activity. What we do in the space with pharma and the technology companies is pre-competitive. So it's by definition open to other entities to join and openly available and accessible for that reason. So we're sensitive to the question you're asking, and we have to manage the middle ground in a suitable way so that it does draw in the right kind of risk mitigation from the private sector, which adds value to this, right, but does not do this at the expense of others. And so we are keeping an eye on it. Again, open source and pre-competitive are foundational here.
Okay, well, I mean, we've seen this happen in other cases too, so it's a very difficult situation when veterans can't have access to medicines that were developed with federal money. We need to work on strengthening those protections. Mr. Wordin, I was pretty excited about your PTSD alarm, and you're using data, and the graphs you showed saw a spike in the heart rate, and then additional sort of physical indicators after that. Were you able to identify in those cases the physical event or the emotional event that triggered those reactions?
We aren't able to do that, but we asked the participants in our study right now to keep a journal, and they were able to document what the environment was. We try to look at both immediately before, a few minutes before, and maybe a half hour before. And it's great empowerment to an individual veteran to understand what causes a PTSD episode for them, because it's different for each veteran.
Oh, absolutely. And if you could understand what's triggering that, then that leads to all kinds of opportunities for treatment and mitigation of those sorts of triggers.
Absolutely. And the great thing about the device is it will measure that and see if what you're doing to mitigate is actually working, or whether you see whether the prescription drug or the therapy options that the VA or your healthcare provider has given to you, you can objectively understand how it's working, what is working, if it's working. And so I mean, that's the great thing about the device, is it's completely objective. It is what it is.
Right, and do you see similar sort of characteristics, data characteristics from different individuals with regard to PTSD triggers?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you look at the spike, if that's what you're referring to, yes. I mean, that's a common theme. If someone's having a PTSD episode, that's how the device detects that PTSD episode is through that spike in heart rate or the heart rate variation.
Well, we saw a spike, and then we saw a little bit of a quiet period, and then we saw additional.
That was, yeah, because the graph that you're referring to, that showed physical activity, because I wanted to differentiate, because one of the questions I always get is, how does it know whether it's physical activity or whether it's a PTSD episode? And the device is able to detect, because the steepness of the curve when you're having a PTSD episode versus when you're, say, riding your bike, there's a difference in how your heart rate elevates and how fast it elevates.
Oh, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And I now recognize, let's see, Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for appearing. This is a great work you're doing, and we really appreciate it. Mr. Meek, you talked about, I don't know your exact words, but you talked about the fact that technology was ahead of the VA's practice, in a sense, and that you get these technological advances that are not a part of the normal VA treatment. I would assume, I don't know this is true, but I make the assumption that advances in technology usually cost more, and that if it does more, it probably costs more. But my question would be, how do we balance that? How do we mold together availability and advancement, so that, I mean, you could have this scenario where you make an advancement, and if you spend all your money making advancements, then you could come up with something that helped a veteran 10 times better than current practice. However, you could only afford 1 out of 10, where under the old technology, you could afford 10 out of 10. Is there a balance there? Do you see what we might be able to do to certainly want to make advancements, but we also want to be able to pay for it?
Sure. So I think to go back to the earlier question about, excuse me, whether the DARPA should be a model to transfer over to the VA, I think it should be. We put the most advanced technology we can in our warfighters, but once it's done meeting DARPA specs for the battlefield, that's it. The funding stops. There's nothing to I'll say, commercialize that for the private sector back at home. And so you look at a lot of these devices, I mentioned how the average cost that we fund is $100,000, with a couple of them almost $200,000. Think about the original cell phone. It was the size of a small suitcase, and cost $1,000. Well, today, it's the size of a calculator, and it fits in your pocket, and it's a supercomputer. So having that continued research and development on a specific device, whatever it may be, for advancement, where that funding comes from, there are certain, I think, separate pools that we could look at. But you have to keep that funding going, because over time, it will bring costs down. A lot of these devices are so advanced that, yes, they cost a lot right now, but 10, 20 years from now, we know some of the work that Dr. Major's doing, they're hardwiring some of these devices into individuals' brains. I've seen virtual reality where somebody lost their arm in Vietnam, and through virtual reality actually felt himself opening a doorknob, and he cried because it was the first time he touched something in 25 years. So this funding has to be found somewhere, because in time, not only will it reduce the cost of those devices, it's going to reduce cost of medical and VA care for those patients.
Well, I saw a live presentation of the type technology you showed in your video, and I was just totally astounded. Someone could actually go from a sitting position and rise with no help at all, not even necessarily using their arms. They could just get up. So I'd want everybody to have that. It's just the idea of making it available is an expensive, and sometimes that would come at the expense of any more technological advances. I had another question. Well, that was Mr. Warden. You mentioned, this doesn't have anything to do with that particular issue. It has to do with self-directed care, mental health care, which I have, you said something about that. I don't know exactly what you said, but it struck a note that that's what you were talking about. In that the person would help in the direction of what they would be choosing for their mental health care. I have seen that work in the private sector. Do you think that ought to be more uniformly applied in the VA?
I don't know if I'd use the word uniformly, but I think it needs to be available, because every veteran that suffers from PTSD is different. if you've seen one veteran with PTSD, you've seen one veteran with PTSD. And I think what they find as their support system individually is the most important path. And the great thing about the HeroTrack device is it gives them feedback individually, so then they can make decisions for themselves based on how their quality of life is that they want or that they have right now. And so if you go to the VA and you see your mental health clinician and he goes, well, how are you sleeping? Oh, I'm not sleeping so good. Well, we're going to give you some Ambien. Well, how do you know whether that actually does any good for you? Well, with the device, you're able to monitor and look at sleep patterns, look at PTSD episodes during sleep, and be able to decide whether or not that's something, because every prescription drug that you take has a side effect or it has some kind of addictive quality, and that affects your quality of life as well. I mean, we have veterans in our program that literally have suitcases full of prescription drugs that the VA sends them on a regular basis, and then when they get into our program, they get off of those prescription drugs, and yet the VA continues to send them the prescription drugs. And when you talk about costs for technology is way cheaper than prescription drugs.
Yes, that's not shocking. And that's awesome. Thank you all for appearing, every one of you. It's been very encouraging, each of you and your work. Yield back.
Thank you. And I just want to take a little prerogative too. If on that particular point, if you can send us some of those examples, with whatever way that protects the patient's privacy, that would just be really helpful in us making this case, because I think this is great disruptive technology that is going to save money. And the more we can highlight examples like that, I think as we move forward. So I now recognize Mr. Dunn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I love these joint committee meetings. We're all gathered. It sort of underscores our interconnectedness. We're sitting here with the energy subcommittee, the research subcommittee. We're talking about quantum computing from our national labs, and it's being applied to translational genomics, and all this on the subject of yet another committee, the Veterans Health. So that's the interconnectedness is great. I'm a urologist, Dr. Kusnezov. I'm a urologist. Prostate cancer is very near and dear to my heart. I know you're working on ways to determine biomarkers that determine more the relative lethality of prostate cancer, what needs to be treated and how aggressively. Can you briefly outline a couple of those for us?
I can talk more to the technology side than the side that you might be more familiar with.
Oh, yeah, so I want to know the biomarker, okay. But I do appreciate what you're doing, and I think that's that's key. Mr. Meek, you partner with VA hospitals, also, I suppose, military hospitals like Walter Reed? No, they're completely separate from you. Of course, they don't need your help, that's right. So you partner with the VA hospitals. How do you select which ones?
So we work with the device manufacturer, and it'll depend on what the device is. So if it's for an individual, sometimes they fall through the VA cracks, and the device manufacturer will find somebody that maybe the VA won't fund it, or the VA will fund the device but not the fitting, and so they'll reach out to us to fill that void. In terms of the exoskeleton devices, again, we work with the manufacturer. There are 24 spinal cord injury medical facilities within the VA center, and so we start with those who have the largest population that they serve, with the goal of hitting all of those with one device to begin with, and then go back and circle back again. So for example, Richmond, Virginia serves the largest with 5,000 spinal cord injured veterans. They have one device. They could use 25. Palo Alto has 3,000 to 4,000 veterans that they serve. They could use a few devices as well. So one doesn't cut it. It's a rehabilitative device where somebody goes in like going to the gym with a personal trainer, and you set your 45-minute time and you do laps around the VA.
All right. Ed, do you also, when you do provide one of these exoskeleton, whatever type suits to the veterans, do you also provide continued support, maintenance, upgrades?
We do. When we purchase it, it also comes with a 4-year warranty, as well as training for the entire staff at the VA.
And you mentioned that regulatory burdens. I just want you to know that we have been tasked by no less than the president to streamline the regulatory burdens. So if you have regulations that you think are bad regulations, duplicative, get in the way, bring them to us. We'd love to get rid of regulations, especially bad ones. Ms. MacCallum, you're sort of a people specialist. You deal with a lot of people, a lot of different strata. In your opinion, have you seen the VAs and the veterans themselves, are they receptive to some of these new technologies? Is it?
Absolutely. You know, but I think about the fact that just demonstrating with Sergeant Rose on the set, on our set, we were able to raise enough money to buy an exosuit for a veterans hospital in one day. So I just think that the awareness that people need to have, and also I think the partnership between public and private entities is so important. And I think about the new VA bill that is moving its way through Congress, and where the gaps exist and the VA can't provide that assistance, they are now allowed to turn to a private entity in order to fill that gap. And I think we need to look for more ways to do that so that private enterprise and the VA can work most efficiently together. And then I think you'll see a scaling up of this technology in private facilities and in veterans facilities. And I think that the will of the people, in terms of what we've seen, is certainly behind it. And I also think that when you look at the cost-benefit analysis in terms of taking care of veterans long-term, and you just heard what Mr. Wordin said about the incredible expense of pharmaceuticals, this psychological benefit and life benefit of these devices hopefully will make some of those pharmaceuticals unnecessary.
Well, I share your optimism, and I thank you for the gratuitous plug for the Mission Act, the VA bill that we're carrying so across the finish line right now. It's near and dear to my heart. I sit on that committee as well. I'm looking at 20 seconds left on the clock, and it's not fair to bring up the question, Mr. Wordin, that you brought up so cogently in your report of the stigma that we attach to PTSD and TBI in our, not just our veterans, but in our active duty troops. And this is a major problem that we have just been whistling past the graveyard on. You know, if we could treat it perfectly, we still aren't allowed to diagnose our active duty troops, or lest we ruin their careers. And we don't have time for you to comment on that, but I'm glad you brought it up. And
if I could, I'd like to say one thing about...
With the chairman's permission?
One of the things that we found in testing, one of the things that was brought up by the VA is that vets wouldn't want to wear a hero track because it would cause a stigma just for them wearing a device. But because it's an Apple Watch, it makes them cool. And so the stigma has been removed, and therefore they're getting help that they wouldn't ordinarily get. So we're very aware of stigma in our organization and the vets that we service. And you know, you got to find creative ways to get around it.
Thank you very much. You bet.
Thank you. And it's gathering general information that's good for health and well-being along the way too, right? So, excellent. I now recognize Mr. Palmer for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairwoman. I'll be fairly brief. I have to preside over the House in a few minutes. But Ms. MacCallum, looking at your involvement in this, I really appreciate how this started with SoldierStrong, providing things to the soldiers in the field. Some good friends of mine, son, Lance Corporal Thomas Rivers' sister, started that program and sending everything from sporting magazines to staples, essential things, and they got to the point where her brother would get things and the other guy would say, well, you know, could you share that? And turned into a program called Support Our Soldiers. Unfortunately, Lance Corporal Rivers was killed in the Helmand province on April 28, 2010, an IED. But the program continues and has expanded, and we're having a banquet next Thursday night, the annual banquet. These programs are incredibly important for morale, but also for the families. That a lot of these guys don't get letters from home, they don't get things from home. So thank you for what you're doing. Mr. Wordin, in your testimony, you mentioned the Project Heroes reduced participants' use of prescription drugs and opioids and other antidepressant use significantly. And Mr. Dunn brought this up as well about, I think the process of dealing with these soldiers begins before they get home. The whole thing about PSTD, all of that begins before they get home. And one of my concerns, we've got 22 veterans per day that commit suicide. And I just have to wonder how much of that's related to reactions to drug use. And what you're trying to do to reduce the dependence on drugs, I think Mr. Wordin, could you comment on that, how you think that might help us reduce what I think is an unbelievable tragedy that's occurring every day with veterans?
Sure. When you look at the report that's going to come out, the risk factors that they looked at, worsening of health status and decline in physical ability, those can be directly related to prescription drug use, particularly when you have over-prescribing of prescription drug use. And it's not working, and therefore you start losing hope, and then it starts depression, and then you're on the downhill spiral, and then eventually that's what leads to suicide. So that's where I think the prescription drug use comes into play, is because for doctors, the easiest solution is, here's a pill, this is going to make you all better. Whereas that's not necessarily what's in the best interest of that individual. And I think that's one of the great and exciting things about the Hero Track, is you're going to be able to figure out what's in the best interest of the individual and be able to prescribe for that person a healthcare path that is actually going to make a difference for him.
Well, thank you. I told Mr. Norman if he would yield to me, I would hold it 3 minutes. I think I came pretty close to that, Mr. Norman, and with that, Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Okay, we'll now recognize Mr. Dunn. Mr. Norman, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. Thanks each of you for taking the time to testify. It's valuable. I'll emphasize what Dr. Dunn said on, as you move forward with, if you see regulations that are impeding what you do, let us know, because we've got a body here that is strong and will take your case to get needless regulations out of the way. It's a goal of the president. It's a goal of this body, this House. Ms. MacCallum, you've got an interesting role, as they described, in the people business, as an anchor and on the advisory board. What is your opinion on this, and what's been your experience on the specific technology for veterans that is effective with raising money and raising the awareness? Is there one or two that you can point to?
You know, I just think when people hear the stories of these veterans and the impact that it has on their lives, you know, here's one veteran, Jason Geiger, who was a SoldierStrong exosuit beneficiary. He said, you cannot put a price on walking. You can't put a price on someone's ability to be 6 feet tall again and stand up and kiss your wife, or stand up and hug your daughter or your son. You can't put a price on that. And we talk a lot about money because we have to, because it's part of bringing this technology to our veterans. But, you know, I think there's a will in America. I know there's a will in America to provide for this. And I do think that people are very much aware, you talk about regulations, of the waste that exists in the federal government in its, you know, good efforts in many ways to solve some of these problems. But I think everyone sitting here is working towards efficiency in improving the lives of our veterans. And I think that through technology and through awareness, a lot of these ideas can help us to cut some of the waste in these programs and to produce more benefit.
And that's, you know, we don't know what we don't know. And I'm glad you brought up waste, because every agency, particularly now, can give us a roadmap as to where there is waste and specifics on how we can address it. And I hope y'all will do that as you move forward, because every dollar saved through waste would go back into potential good use. Mr. Meeks, how did we decide on the SoldierStrong decide which VA hospitals will receive the soldier suits?
So again, we work with the device manufacturer, and within the VA medical system, there are 24 facilities that have a spinal cord injury unit. In addition, we also work with those that have a traumatic unit as well. And so the spinal cord injury unit will be focused more on spinal cord injury versus traumatic could focus on stroke. And so we'll take the recommendation from the device manufacturer with the goal of getting those that serve the largest population a device first, and then going from there.
Okay, perfect. Thank y'all. I think we're about at 12 o'clock. Really appreciate your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you so much. And I thank the witnesses for their testimony today and the members for their questions. Without objection, Chairman Weber and Ranking Member VC's opening statements, which they were not available to make when we started the hearing, are made a part of the record. And I really so appreciate the great testimony here today. I think we're really seeing disruptive, positive, innovative technology, and I think there's no question that we need to reallocate resources, get new resources, and make sure we're providing this choice, because we're talking, a lot of the things we're talking about in our veterans and what we're trying to improve are more veterans' choice, and what you're offering is more choice and more positive outcomes. And I really do think it's a lot of win-win solutions that you have here. So we look forward to working with you on how we can redirect and reprioritize this so we actually end up with better outcomes that will ultimately, most importantly, save lives, but also save money. So this is really exciting, and I think this is the beginning of what I hope will be a continued discussion on this. We're already discussing maybe some legislation and efforts that we can work on with our colleagues here on this committee who are also on the Veterans Committee. So thank you for your inspirational work, and the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional written comments and written questions from members, and this hearing is now adjourned.
That was wonderful. Thank you. I really enjoyed your testimony. It was very interesting. Yeah,
I'd love
please.
to come on your show.
Yeah, that would be great.